The flash of red and blue lights in a rearview mirror is a universally understood language of dread. But for the man driving the unassuming 10-year-old sedan, it wasn't a surprise. It was an inevitability. Beneath a worn canvas jacket, he wore a custom-tailored suit that cost more than the car. His hands, resting calmly on the wheel, were clean and manicured. His heartbeat was a steady rhythmic drum. He was a predator hunting far more dangerous game in this quiet town, and he had just been spotted by a lesser beast. As Officer Frank Kincaid swaggered to the window, his hand resting on his service weapon, he saw only what he wanted to see: a target. He believed he held all the power on this lonely stretch of road. He was about to learn in the most brutal way possible how wrong he was. The town of Cedar Creek, Oregon, prided itself on its tranquility. It was a sleepy enclave nestled in the foothills of the Cascades, a place where the biggest news was usually the high school football team's latest victory or a dispute over property lines. It was precisely this veneer of normalcy that made it the perfect breeding ground for the rot the FBI was investigating. And it was this same predictable quiet that made Officer Frank Kincaid's blood boil whenever he saw something or someone he deemed out of place. David Sterling, driving a beige 2015 Toyota Camry with 120,000 miles on it, was decidedly out of place. It wasn't just that he was a black man in a town that was 94% white. It was the way he drove, perfectly at the speed limit, signaling 100 feet before his turn, coming to a full 3-second stop at every sign. To Kincaid, this wasn't careful driving. It was suspicious. It was the driving of someone with something to hide. He'd been following Sterling for 3 blocks. "Watch this, Ben," Kincaid grunted to his partner, a rookie named Ben Miller, who was still trying to navigate the unwritten rules of his senior officer. "Guy's driving like he's taking his grandma to church on Sunday. I guarantee he's dirty." "What's the PC, Frank?" Miller asked, his voice betraying his nervousness. "We don't have anything on him." "We do now," Kincaid said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. He flicked on the overhead lights. "Right tail light's a shade dimmer than the left. Vehicle code violation. That's our ticket in." Miller squinted at the Camry ahead. The taillight looked fine to him, but he knew better than to argue. Arguing with Frank Kincaid was like arguing with a brick wall if the brick wall had a badge and a temper. David Sterling watched the approaching officer in his side mirror. He saw the puffed-out chest, the military-style haircut, the hand already hovering near the holstered Glock. He'd encountered 100 Frank Kincaids in his career. They were all the same, bullies who used the shield as a cover for their own inadequacies and prejudices. Sterling's mission in Cedar Creek was far too important to be derailed by a small-town cop on a power trip. His objective now was simple: de-escalate, comply, and get away as quickly and quietly as possible. He rolled his window down smoothly as Kincaid reached the driver's side. The scent of pine and damp earth rushed in, mingling with the cheap air freshener hanging from the mirror. "Evening, officer," Sterling said, his voice calm and even. He placed his hands on the top of the steering wheel, palms up, a gesture of non-aggression. Kincaid ignored the greeting. He shined his maglite directly into Sterling's eyes, forcing him to squint. "License and registration, now." Sterling moved with deliberate slowness. "Of course, sir. My wallet is in my right back pocket. The registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now." "You do that," Kincaid said, his tone dripping with disdain. He leaned in closer, his gaze sweeping the car's interior. He saw a duffel bag on the passenger seat and a fast food wrapper on the floor. "What are you doing in Cedar Creek? You're a long way from Portland." "Just passing through on my way to visit family in Bend," Sterling lied smoothly. It was his cover story, simple and verifiable if checked superficially. He handed over a pristine Oregon driver's license and the car's registration. The name read David Johnson, another part of his meticulously crafted undercover identity. Kincaid snatched the documents. "David Johnson," Kincaid read aloud, sneering as if the name itself was an offense. He walked back to his patrol car, leaving Sterling to sit in the unnerving silence. Inside the cruiser, Miller ran the name. "License is valid. No wants, no warrants. Registration is clean. Cars registered to a holding company, probably a rental fleet." "A holding company," Kincaid scoffed. See? Something's not right. He's nervous. He doesn't seem nervous to me, Frank, Miller ventured. He seems calm. It's a front, a guilty man's calm. Kincaid stared back at the Camry, his eyes narrowed. He was building his narrative, the one that would go in his report, the one that justified what he was about to do. He wasn't just a cop, he was a gatekeeper, and this man did not belong. He strode back to the car. Mr. Johnson, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. A flicker of annoyance crossed Sterling's face, but his voice remained steady. Officer, may I ask why? I've provided my license and registration. Is there a problem? The problem is I smell marijuana, Kincaid said flatly. It was a blatant lie. The only scent was the pine air freshener and old coffee. Miller, standing by the passenger side, knew it was a lie. His stomach churned. This was the line, the one his training officer at the academy warned him about. The point where a hunch fueled by bias became an illegal search. Sterling's composure hardened. He was a federal agent on a Title III wiretap investigation into a human trafficking ring run by the Aryan Brotherhood, a group with deep roots in the Pacific Northwest. The duffel bag on his passenger seat didn't contain drugs. It contained sensitive surveillance equipment and files that could compromise a year-long, multi-agency operation. Allowing this cop to search his car was not an option. Officer, with all due respect, there is no marijuana in my car. I do not consent to a search of my vehicle, Sterling stated clearly and firmly. The refusal was all Kincaid needed. It was the challenge to his authority that he craved. I don't need your consent, Kincaid snarled, his hand now firmly on his weapon. I have probable cause. Now get out of the car or I'll drag you out. Sterling made a calculated decision. Being dragged out would create a scene and escalate the situation violently. He could fight it. He was more than capable of disarming Kincaid and his rookie partner. But that would blow his cover sky high. His only play was to comply under protest and deal with the fallout later. The mission was paramount. He slowly opened the door and stepped out, hands raised slightly. I am complying, but I am stating for the record that this is an illegal stop and an illegal search. You can state whatever you want to your cellmate, Kincaid spat. Turn around, hands behind your back. As the cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his wrists, Sterling locked eyes with the rookie, Miller, over Kincaid's shoulder. He saw fear and uncertainty in the young officer's eyes. It was a look he recognized, the look of a man who knew something was deeply wrong but lacked the courage to stop it. Kincaid shoved Sterling against the side of the Camry. You think you're smart, huh? Coming into my town? We'll see how smart you are. He began his pat-down, unnecessarily rough, his hands lingering, searching for a reaction. Sterling remained silent, his mind racing. His primary concern was the duffel bag. His secondary concern was the 9mm Sig Sauer P221E6, holstered in a concealed ankle rig, the one Kincaid's sloppy pat-down would almost certainly miss. This traffic stop was no longer a nuisance. It had just become a critical threat to national security. The back of a police cruiser has a unique smell, a mixture of stale sweat, cheap disinfectant, and desperation. For David Sterling, it was a familiar, if unwelcome, scent. He watched the quaint storefronts of Cedar Creek slide by through the smudged plexiglass, a town that looked like a postcard but harbored a darkness he was sworn to expose. Now he was trapped in its petty machinations, a prisoner of a man whose authority was dwarfed by his ego. Find anything, Ben? Kincaid's voice crackled over the radio from the Camry. No, Frank. Just some clothes, a laptop, and some electronic stuff in this bag, Miller replied, his voice hesitant. Sterling's jaw tightened. Electronic stuff. Miller was looking at a portable spectrum analyzer, frequency jammers, and encrypted hard drives. To a rookie, it might look like high-end stereo equipment. To someone with the right training, it was a federal agent's toolkit. Bag it all up as evidence. We'll tear it apart at the station, Kincaid ordered. He probably wiped the car down, but I bet we find some residue when we get the dogs on it. Kincaid got back in the driver's seat, a triumphant smirk on his face. You should have just let me look, Johnson, he said, looking at Sterling in the rearview mirror. Now you've got resisting obstruction. We'll find the drugs. We always do. Sterling didn't respond. He was focusing, compartmentalizing. The equipment was triple encrypted. It would take the FBI's own cyber division weeks to crack it without his credentials. The immediate danger was the physical evidence, case notes, surveillance photos of the trafficking suspects that were on a thumb drive disguised as a key fob on the car's keychain. He could only hope Miller would miss it. The Cedar Creek Police Department was a small, squat brick building that felt more like a regional bank branch than a hall of justice. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a monotonous buzz, casting a sickly yellow pallor on the linoleum floors. Kincaid paraded Sterling through the main bullpen, shoving him forward for the benefit of the other officers. "Look what the cat dragged in," Kincaid announced. "Caught this one trying to bring his Portland poison into our town." A few of the older cops chuckled. The younger ones, like the dispatcher, a young woman named Sarah, avoided eye contact. They'd seen Frank's show before. Sterling was deposited into a holding cell. The steel door clanged shut with a deafening finality. The cell was cold, bare, and smelled of vomit and regret. It contained a single steel bench and a toilet without a seat. He sat down, the metal instantly cold against his skin, and began to wait. He knew the procedure. He had exactly one phone call. He had to make it count. In the booking room, Kincaid was embellishing his report with fervor, transforming a flimsy pretext into a heroic tale of keen-eyed police work. "Subject appeared nervous and evasive," he typed. A distinct odor of cannabis emanated from the vehicle upon approach. When asked to exit the vehicle, the subject became confrontational, forcing me to detain him for officer safety. A search based on probable cause was initiated. Miller stood by, reading over his shoulder, a knot tightening in his stomach. Every sentence was a lie, a carefully constructed fiction designed to protect Kincaid and condemn Sterling. "Frank, I didn't smell anything," Miller said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Kincaid stopped typing and slowly turned his head. His eyes were cold and hard. "Are you questioning my report, Miller? Are you calling me a liar?" "No, I don't want to sign off on something if I'm not sure." Kincaid stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He got in Miller's face, his voice a low growl. "Listen to me, kid. That man out there is a criminal. You can feel it. I've been doing this for 15 years, and my gut is never wrong. You write what I tell you to write, you sign your name, and you learn how this job is really done. Or you can go back to writing parking tickets. Do you understand me?" Miller swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He looked from Kincaid's furious face to the holding cell where Sterling sat, perfectly still, watching them through the small reinforced window. He gave a short, defeated nod. "Yeah, Frank, I understand." An hour later, Sterling was brought out for his phone call. Kincaid stood over him, arms crossed, as Sterling picked up the receiver. "You get one call. Make it quick," Kincaid snapped. Sterling ignored him. He dialed a 10-digit number from memory. It wasn't a number for a lawyer or a family member. It was a secure, unlisted line to the FBI's Portland field office, a direct link to his supervisor. A crisp, professional voice answered on the first ring. "Reynolds, this is Special Agent David Sterling," Sterling said, his voice level. He knew the line was likely being recorded by the station, but it didn't matter now. The die was cast. "I have a situation. Code name. Operation Cornerstone is compromised. I am currently detained at the Cedar Creek Police Department. Officer's name is Frank Kincaid, badge number 714. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Sterling could almost hear the gears turning in the mind of Special Agent in Charge Michael Reynolds, a man known for his icy demeanor and brutal efficiency. "Understood, Agent Sterling," Reynolds' voice came back, now laced with steel. "Stay put. We're on our way." Sterling hung up the phone. Kincaid laughed, a loud, ugly sound. "Special Agent? You? That's rich. Who was that? Your drug dealer? You think that little performance is going to scare me?" Sterling simply looked at him, his expression unreadable. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. He was led back to his cell. As the door slammed shut again, a small, genuine smile touched David Sterling's lips for the first time that night. Kincaid thought he was in control. He thought he had won. The reality was that Frank Kincaid had just started a clock, and when it ran out, his entire world was going to be consumed by fire. He just didn't know it yet. The next 45 minutes passed with the slow, deliberate tick of a bomb's timer. Kincaid, riding high on his perceived victory, finished his report and filed the evidence into an unsecured locker. He regaled a couple of night shift patrolmen with a dramatized version of the arrest, painting Sterling as a hardened criminal who thought he could outsmart the law in Cedar Creek. Miller, meanwhile, sat at his own desk, staring at the false report he'd just co-signed, the ink feeling like a permanent stain on his soul. The first sign that the world was tilting off its axis came not as a bang, but as a whisper. The station's dispatch radio, usually filled with mundane chatter about noise complaints or stray animals, fell silent. Then a new voice cut through the quiet, a calm, authoritative female voice that none of them recognized. All Cedar Creek units, be advised. Federal Bureau of Investigation personnel are on approach to your location. Do not interfere. Await instruction. Acknowledge. Police Chief Bill Donovan, a portly man just a few years from retirement, lumbered out of his office. What the hell was that? Before anyone could answer, the front doors of the station swung open. Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits entered. They moved with an unnerving purpose, their eyes scanning the room, assessing every person in it. They were followed by another two, and then another. Within seconds, 6 stone-faced men and women who radiated an aura of absolute authority had filled the small bullpen. The last man to enter was tall and silver-haired, with a face that looked like it was carved from granite. This was Special Agent in Charge Michael Reynolds. "Who's in charge here?" Reynolds asked, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of the entire Department of Justice. Chief Donovan puffed out his chest, trying to assert some semblance of control. "I'm Chief Donovan. What's the meaning of this?" Reynolds didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on Kincaid. He held up a laminated ID. "SAC Michael Reynolds, FBI. We're here for our agent. Where is he?" Kincaid's smug expression faltered. He blinked, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Your agent? We don't have any of your agents. We have a drug suspect in lockup. Name of David Johnson." Reynolds' lips curled into a humorless smile. "There is no David Johnson. There is only Special Agent David Sterling, who is working on a federally mandated undercover operation that you, Officer Kincaid, have just catastrophically compromised." The color drained from Kincaid's face. The bullpen, which had been buzzing with confused whispers, went dead silent. The only sound was the incessant hum of the lights overhead. Miller looked like he was going to be sick. That's not possible," Kincaid stammered. I pulled him over for a broken taillight. I smelled marijuana." "You smelled a pretext," Reynolds shot back, taking a step forward. His voice dropped to a menacing growl. "Agent Sterling's vehicle is equipped with 360-degree high-definition video and audio recording. The second you lit him up, you were on camera. My technicians are already pulling the data from the cloud. It will show there was no traffic violation. It will show there was no smell of marijuana. It will show you conducting an illegal search and making a false arrest of a federal officer in the course of his duties." Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling Kincaid's reality piece by piece. His swagger evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked fear. His eyes darted around the room, looking for support, but he found none. His fellow officers, even his friends, were slowly backing away, creating a physical space around him as if his career were contagious. "Get him," Reynolds commanded one of his agents. The agent retrieved the key to the holding cells from a stunned-looking desk sergeant and opened Sterling's cell. David Sterling walked out, his composure as immaculate as when he was first arrested. He nodded once to Reynolds. "Sir." "Agent," Reynolds acknowledged. "Are you harmed?" "No, sir. Just inconvenienced." Reynolds' gaze then fell on the evidence locker, where Sterling's duffel bag and laptop had been stored. "Secure that equipment. Get it to the tech van. Now," he ordered 2 other agents. They moved with swift, silent efficiency. Sterling walked over to Kincaid, who was now pale and trembling. He held out his cuffed hands. "I believe these are yours, officer." It was Ben Miller who numbly stepped forward with the key, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit it in the lock. As the cuffs came off, Sterling rubbed his wrists, his eyes never leaving Kincaid's. "You have the right to remain silent," Sterling said, his voice low and devoid of any emotion. The words so often used by Kincaid as a tool of intimidation were now being turned back on him like a sharpened blade. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Chief Donovan finally found his voice. "Now hold on a minute. You can't arrest my officer in his own station." Reynolds turned his ice-cold glare on the chief. "I'm not arresting him, Chief. I'm detaining him on suspicion of violating Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, deprivation of rights under color of law, a federal crime. My colleagues from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division will be here within the hour to interview him. Right now, he is a federal detainee on city property. We are also impounding his patrol car and his body camera as evidence. And you," Reynolds said, pointing a finger at Donovan, "are going to give us a secure room to conduct our interview, or this station becomes part of a federal crime scene. Is that clear?" Donovan's face went from red to ashen. He had built his career on managing this small town, on keeping the peace and sweeping problems under the rug. But this was not a problem. This was an invasion, and he was utterly, hopelessly outgunned. He gave a weak nod. "This way." As two FBI agents flanked a stunned Frank Kincaid and led him towards an interrogation room, Sterling finally looked at Miller. The young rookie was leaning against a wall, his face buried in his hands. "You knew it was a bogus stop, didn't you, Officer Miller?" Sterling asked quietly. Miller looked up, his eyes filled with shame. Yes, I knew. You signed the report anyway." "He's my senior officer. I didn't know what to do," Miller stammered. Sterling just stared at him for a long moment. "You will," he said. "Believe me, you will know exactly what to do very soon." He then turned and walked away, leaving Miller alone with the ruins of his partner's career and the terrifying choice that now lay before him. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The FBI moved with the precision of a surgical team, dissecting the Cedar Creek Police Department's cozy ecosystem. Agent Sterling's equipment was retrieved and confirmed to be untampered with. His undercover vehicle, now officially FBI evidence, was loaded onto a flatbed truck and whisked away to a secure facility in Portland. Inside the station, an invisible line had been drawn. On one side were the federal agents, speaking in low tones into encrypted radios, their faces impassive. On the other were the local cops, huddled together, whispering and casting anxious glances at the interrogation room where Frank Kincaid's world was being systematically dismantled by two lawyers from the DOJ. David Sterling stood with SAC Reynolds near the main entrance, watching the operation unfold. The adrenaline from the arrest was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. Not at Kincaid was just a symptom, but at the compromised mission. "How bad is it?" Reynolds asked, his eyes on the street outside. "It's bad," Sterling admitted. "My cover as David Johnson is blown. Anyone Kincaid talked to, anyone who saw me brought in here, now knows my face is associated with law enforcement. The Aryan Brotherhood elements we're targeting in this area are paranoid. They'll hear about this. The wiretap on their supply chain hub is now in jeopardy. We may have to accelerate the timeline, move in before we're fully ready. Which means people could get away, or get hurt," Reynolds finished the thought, his jaw tight. "One cop's racial profiling could unravel a year of work and let a dozen human traffickers walk." "He wasn't just profiling, sir. He was manufacturing a crime. He lied about probable cause to justify a search he knew was illegal. This was malicious." Reynolds nodded grimly. "I know, and that's why we're not letting this go. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already been briefed. They're taking this very seriously." Inside the interrogation room, Kincaid was learning just how seriously. The two DOJ attorneys, a man named Robert Chen and a woman named Maria Sanchez, were not aggressive. They were worse. They were methodical, calm, and armed with indisputable facts. They played a recording from Sterling's vehicle for him. The audio was crystal clear, his own voice belligerent and confident, claiming to smell a drug that wasn't there. Sterling's calm, firm denial of consent. And then Kincaid's illegal threat to drag him from the car. There was no ambiguity. Officer Kincaid, Sanchez said, her voice soft but unyielding. The evidence we have is overwhelming. At this point, you are not just facing termination from the police force, you are facing a federal indictment that carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. And that's if we don't find a pattern of this behavior. Kincaid, who had started the interview with blustering denials, was now slumped in his chair. The armor of his badge was gone. He was just a man in a room who had made a catastrophic mistake. It was a mistake, he mumbled. My instincts were off. Your instincts? Chen countered, leaning forward slightly. Or your prejudices? We are going to be pulling every arrest report you've ever filed, officer. We're going to be looking at every traffic stop, every search, every use of force. We're going to be interviewing every person of color you've ever put in handcuffs. If we find that instinct of yours is just a code word for racial bias, the charges will be significantly worse. Meanwhile, Chief Donovan was on the phone with the town's mayor, trying to explain how his police department had just become the subject of a major federal civil rights investigation. The conversation was not going well. The political fallout would be immense. Cedar Creek's carefully cultivated image of a peaceful, safe community was about to be shattered on the evening news. And the first domino in that investigation was Officer Ben Miller. He was approached by a different FBI agent, a calm, fatherly type named Peterson. He didn't take Miller to an interrogation room. He just asked him to step outside for some fresh air. They stood in the station's parking lot, the night air crisp and cold. Tough night, son, Peterson said, not looking at Miller directly. Yes, sir, Miller squeaked. You signed a false report. That's a crime. Perjury, obstruction of justice. Your career could be over before it's even begun. Peterson paused, letting the words hang in the air. However, you're also a witness to a federal crime, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has a great deal of discretion when it comes to witnesses who choose to cooperate. Miller's head was spinning. He'd only wanted to be a cop to help people, to do good like his uncle who was a detective in Seattle. He never imagined he'd be caught between loyalty to a corrupt partner and a federal prison sentence. Frank, he said he had a gut feeling, Miller said weakly, a last-ditch effort to defend the indefensible. Peterson finally turned to look at him, his eyes filled with a weary disappointment. Let me tell you something about gut feelings. A good cop's gut is based on evidence they can't articulate yet. A furtive glance, a mismatched story, the smell of gunpowder. A bad cop's gut is just their bigotry looking for an excuse. Which one was Kincaid's tonight? Miller looked down at his shoes. He knew the answer. He had known it from the moment Kincaid had flipped on the lights. I have a wife, Miller whispered, a baby on the way. Then you have a choice to make, Peterson said gently. Are you going to be the kind of man who lies to protect a criminal, or the kind of man your kid can be proud of? For Miller, that was the question that finally broke through the fear and the misplaced loyalty. He thought of his unborn child and the kind of world he wanted to bring them into. He thought of the oath he took at the academy, and he thought of the calm, dignified man he had helped handcuff on the side of the road. He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. What do you need me to do? He asked, his voice shaking but clear. Back inside, Kincaid was placed on administrative leave and stripped of his badge and gun by a shell-shocked Chief Donovan. He was allowed to go home, but he was no longer a police officer. He was a suspect. As he walked out of the station in his civilian clothes, none of his colleagues would meet his eye. The shockwave from that single prejudiced traffic stop was just beginning to radiate outwards. It would tear apart a police department, threaten a vital federal investigation, and hurl Frank Kincaid's life into a downward spiral from which he would never recover. The immediate drama was over, but the long, grinding process of karma had just begun. In the weeks that followed, the story of Officer Frank Kincaid and the FBI agent he arrested became a local media sensation. It was picked up by Portland's Channel 8 News, with reporter Susan Chang running a series of investigative pieces that peeled back the layers of the Cedar Creek Police Department. The official narrative from the mayor's office was one of an isolated incident involving a single officer whose actions do not reflect the values of our community. But the federal investigation told a different story. Lieutenant Isabella Rossi of the Oregon State Police Professional Standards Bureau was tasked with heading the internal administrative investigation, working in parallel with the DOJ's criminal probe. Rossi was a formidable investigator with a reputation for being thorough and immune to the pressures of the blue wall of silence. Her office became the epicenter of the case against Kincaid. Her key witness was Ben Miller. In a sterile conference room, Miller sat across from Rossi and an FBI agent, recounting every detail of that night. He confessed to signing the false report, his voice choked with shame. But then he went further. Prompted by Rossi's careful, incisive questioning, he began to recount other incidents. It wasn't the first time, Miller admitted, staring at his hands. Frank called it proactive policing. He'd pull over any person of color in a nice car. He'd find a reason, a cracked windshield, driving too slow, a wide turn. He'd say things like, "Let's go rattle some cages," or "Time to take out the trash." Miller provided dates, names, and license plates from memory where he could. He told them about an illegal search of a Latino family's minivan last month, where Kincaid had dumped their belongings on the side of the highway after claiming he smelled drugs, only to find nothing. He recounted a time Kincaid had deliberately intimidated a group of black teenagers who were just fishing at the local reservoir. Each story was another nail in Kincaid's coffin. Miller's testimony, corroborated by his own daily activity logs and the GPS data from his and Kincaid's patrol car, painted a damning picture of a predator who used his badge as a hunting license. The DOJ investigators, armed with Miller's information, began reaching out to the victims. Many were initially hesitant to speak, fearing retaliation. But with the full weight of the federal government encouraging them, the stories started to pour in. A formal class action civil rights lawsuit was filed against the city of Cedar Creek. Naming Frank Kincaid specifically, the town's liability insurance skyrocketed overnight. For Kincaid, life had become a living hell. His suspension without pay meant the bills were piling up. His wife, who had grown up in a family of cops, was horrified and humiliated. The friends he had on the force, who once shared beers and jokes with him, now crossed the street to avoid him. They were terrified of being tainted by his scandal, of being the next target of Rossi's investigation. One evening, Kincaid's wife, Karen, confronted him in their living room. A stack of letters from a law firm sat on the coffee table between them. "Is it true, Frank?" she asked, her voice trembling. "All the things they're saying on the news? The other families?" "It's a witch hunt," Kincaid exploded, his face red with rage and fear. "It was one bad stop. That guy Sterling, he tricked me. And that little rat Miller is just trying to save his own skin by throwing me to the wolves. But you lied on the report, Frank. You lied to me. You told me you caught a big-time drug dealer. You were so proud." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "They took your gun. They took your badge. Our friends won't even talk to us. This isn't a witch hunt. This is our life, and you destroyed it." "I was doing my job," he roared. "No," she said, her voice dropping to a broken whisper. "You were being a bully, and now it's all crashing down." She left the next day, taking their 2 young children to stay with her sister in Idaho. The note she left on the kitchen counter simply said, "I can't do this anymore." Meanwhile, Agent Sterling and his team were dealing with the fallout on Operation Cornerstone. As he predicted, the criminal organization got spooked. The trafficking hub in Cedar Creek went dark. But Sterling was a master strategist. He and Reynolds used the disruption to their advantage. They knew the traffickers would need to move their operation, and when they did, they'd be vulnerable. The FBI anticipated their likely relocation points. They redeployed their surveillance teams, setting a new, wider net. It was a high-stakes gamble, forcing them to burn through resources and manpower, all because of Kincaid. But Sterling was determined not to let him have the last word. He worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and a relentless drive to see the mission through. He owed it to the victims of the trafficking ring, who were still suffering while he dealt with the consequences of one man's bigotry. Back in Cedar Creek, the city council held a closed-door emergency session. Their lawyer, a man named Arthur Hayes, laid out the grim reality. "The evidence against Officer Kincaid in the federal criminal case is ironclad," Hayes explained. "His body cam footage, which the feds decrypted, is damning. It corroborates Agent Sterling's account and Officer Miller's testimony entirely. The DOJ is going to indict, and the civil suit, given the number of plaintiffs coming forward, our potential liability is in the tens of millions." We have to cut him loose. Officially. The vote was unanimous. The following morning, Chief Donovan, looking haggard and years older, held a press conference. He announced that following the conclusion of the internal investigation, Officer Frank Kincaid's employment with the Cedar Creek Police Department was terminated, effective immediately. Kincaid heard the news on the TV in his empty house. He hurled his coffee mug at the screen, shattering it. He was alone, unemployed, his family was gone, and a federal indictment was hanging over his head like the sword of Damocles. The grinding wheels of justice were just getting started, and they were poised to crush him completely. The federal grand jury indictment came down 6 weeks after Kincaid's termination. The charges were read out by a stern-faced U.S. Attorney, William Thorne, at a press conference in Portland. 2 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, and 1 count of obstruction of justice for falsifying a police report. Frank Kincaid, the once feared lawman of Cedar Creek, was now officially a federal defendant. His arraignment was a pathetic affair. Stripped of his uniform, he looked small and deflated in an ill-fitting suit. He pleaded not guilty, but his voice lacked conviction. His court-appointed lawyer looked bored and overworked. The swagger was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed look of a man who knows he is trapped. The case against him was a mountain of evidence. The prosecution, led by the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, had the flawless recording from Sterling's vehicle. They had the damning testimony of Ben Miller, who was granted immunity in exchange for his full cooperation. And they had a parade of other witnesses, citizens of Cedar Creek and surrounding areas, who came forward to testify about Kincaid's pattern of harassment and discrimination. A respected black business owner from a neighboring town testified that Kincaid had pulled him over 3 times in 6 months, subjecting him to searches for no reason other than he was driving a new Cadillac. A young Hispanic mother tearfully described how Kincaid had accused her teenage son of being a gang member simply for wearing a baseball cap backward. The local media followed every development. Kincaid became the face of police misconduct in Oregon. His name became a verb in some circles. Don't get Kincaided. His attempts to find work were fruitless. No security firm would hire him. He ended up taking a job as a night shift stocker at a big box store 40 miles away, wearing a hoodie and a baseball cap to hide his face. A ghost in his own life. The financial toll was equally devastating. The civil lawsuit was moving forward, and the city of Cedar Creek, in a move to mitigate its own damages, settled its portion early for a staggering sum. However, the lawsuit against Kincaid personally continued. His police union provided a lawyer for his criminal defense, but refused to help with the civil case, citing the willful and malicious nature of his actions. He was forced to sell his house to cover the mounting legal fees, the same house he and Karen had bought with such hope just 5 years earlier. The sold sign on the lawn was a monument to his failure. One day, while stocking shelves with dog food in the dead of night, he saw a familiar face at the end of the aisle. It was Ben Miller, pushing a cart with a car seat in it. Their eyes met for a brief second. Kincaid saw a flicker of pity in Miller's eyes before the younger man quickly turned and walked away, disappearing into the next aisle. The rejection was more profound than any courtroom verdict. Miller, the rookie he had bullied and mentored, was a new father, a respected officer who had been commended for his courage in coming forward. He had a future. Kincaid had only a past. The weight of it all was crushing him. He started drinking heavily, alone in his cramped, dingy apartment. The rage he once directed at the world now turned inward. He replayed the traffic stop over and over in his mind. How could he have been so stupid, so arrogant? He had held all the power, and in one moment of unchecked prejudice, he had burned his entire life to the ground. He had become the very thing he despised, a nobody, a loser, a criminal. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away in an arid landscape near the Arizona-Mexico border, Operation Cornerstone was reaching its climax. The Aryan Brotherhood trafficking cell had made their move, just as Sterling and Reynolds had predicted. They had tried to relocate their operation, to smuggle their human cargo across a different section of the border. But the FBI was waiting. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert floor, tactical teams moved in. Sterling, clad in full tactical gear, led one of the entry teams into the dusty compound. The raid was executed with flawless precision. The traffickers were caught completely by surprise. The leaders were arrested, and more importantly, 24 victims, men, women, and children who were being held in horrific conditions, were rescued. As the medics tended to the victims and the suspects were being loaded into vehicles, Sterling stood on a small rise looking over the scene. His earpiece crackled with reports of success from the other raid locations. They had decapitated the entire network. A year of painstaking work had come to a successful, violent conclusion. He felt a profound sense of relief, but not triumph. He thought of the faces of the people they had just freed. And then, unbidden, he thought of Frank Kincaid, a small man whose hatred had nearly allowed these monsters to get away. He realized then that the two were connected. Kincaid's brand of casual, systemic cruelty and the trafficker's brand of organized evil both stem from the same dark place. A dehumanization of others, a belief that some people were worth less than others. The fight against both was the same fight, and it was a fight that was never truly over. The trial of Frank Kincaid was short and brutal. His defense attorney tried to argue that it was a simple mistake, a lapse in judgment under the pressures of police work. But the prosecution, led by Robert Chen from the DOJ, methodically dismantled that defense. They played the audio and video for the jury. The jurors saw Kincaid's swagger, heard his sneering tone, and witnessed his blatant lie about smelling marijuana. They listened to Ben Miller's reluctant but firm testimony, his voice cracking as he recounted how Kincaid had threatened his career to force him to sign the false report. The most powerful moment of the trial, however, came when Special Agent David Sterling took the stand. Dressed in a simple dark suit, he was the picture of professionalism. He didn't speak with anger or malice. He simply recounted the facts of the traffic stop, his voice a steady, clear baritone. "When Officer Kincaid approached my vehicle," Sterling said, looking directly at the jury, "he wasn't seeing a citizen. He wasn't seeing a potential threat or a person in need of help. He saw a stereotype. He saw a target for his authority. And in doing so, he not only violated my civil rights, but he jeopardized a federal investigation and endangered the lives of dozens of trafficking victims." During the cross-examination, Kincaid's lawyer tried to paint Sterling as an arrogant federal agent who looked down on small-town cops. "Agent Sterling, isn't it true that you could have identified yourself as an FBI agent at any time and ended the situation?" the lawyer asked. "My identity and my mission were classified," Sterling replied calmly. "My job was to maintain my cover at all costs. The safety of confidential informants and the integrity of a multi-year investigation depended on it. A lawful traffic stop for a supposed dim taillight should not require a citizen to reveal they are a federal agent to avoid being arrested." The argument fell flat. The jury understood. They were citizens too. They knew what it felt like to be pulled over. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, Kincaid, seated at the defense table, looked visibly ill. He wouldn't look at them. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with glasses, handed the verdict to the bailiff. The judge read it aloud, his voice echoing in the silent room. "On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, count 1, we the jury find the defendant, Frank Kincaid, guilty." A muffled sob came from the back of the courtroom, where Kincaid's elderly parents were sitting. "On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, count 2, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty." Guilty on all counts. Kincaid slumped forward as if he'd been punched in the gut. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but the gesture was useless. It was over. 2 weeks later, at the sentencing, the judge delivered a blistering condemnation of Kincaid's actions. "You took an oath to uphold the law, Mr. Kincaid," the judge said, his voice ringing with authority. "Instead, you became the law. You used your badge not as a shield to protect the innocent, but as a hammer to intimidate and punish those you deemed unworthy. Your actions are a stain on the honor of every law enforcement officer who does their job with integrity and respect for the Constitution. The message must be sent that this abuse of power will not be tolerated." He sentenced Frank Kincaid to 36 months in a federal penitentiary. The final image the world saw of Frank Kincaid was of him being led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his face pale and tear-streaked. The hard karma he had sown on that lonely road in Cedar Creek had finally been reaped. Months later, David Sterling received a formal commendation from the director of the FBI for his conduct during the incident and his leadership in the successful conclusion of Operation Cornerstone. The letter mentioned his grace under pressure and his unwavering commitment to the mission. He read the letter in his office in Portland and filed it away. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt a weary sense of justice. Kincaid was in prison, a necessary consequence. But Sterling knew there were thousands more Frank Kincaids out there. The work was never done. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his door. It was a young agent, fresh out of Quantico. He was African American, sharp, eager, and reminded Sterling of himself 10 years ago. "Agent Sterling, sir?" the young man asked. "SAC Reynolds said you'd be my training agent for my first field assignment." Sterling looked at the young man's hopeful face. He stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome to Portland, Agent," Sterling said, a small, determined smile on his face. "We have a lot of work to do." The cycle continued, but for one man, the echo of his actions would be the sound of a prison door slamming shut, a stark and fitting reminder that justice, though sometimes slow, has a long and unforgiving memory. The story of Frank Kincaid isn't just about one bad cop. It's a powerful testament to the fact that no one is above the law, and that karma, sometimes assisted by the full weight of the justice system, has a way of balancing the scales. From a position of absolute power on a dark road to a federal prison cell, Kincaid's journey is a stark reminder that prejudice and abuse of authority carry a heavy price. The very system he used as a weapon became the instrument of his own downfall. David Sterling's quiet professionalism and Ben Miller's eventual courage show that integrity can still shine through in the darkest of situations. If you found this story of consequence and hard-hitting justice compelling, please hit that like button to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who needs to see that accountability is possible. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have many more stories like this to share, and you won't want to miss a single one. What did you think of the final verdict for Officer Kincaid? Was it justice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.